They tried to pretend they didn't even know it. They acted as if they had nothing. So there's a different type of denial. One is denying that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is confirming what you have. Second is to deny you even have it in the first place for him to confirm it, right? So this is, but not all of them. So the English translation has put the word party, okay? But you have a sense actually, and this is going to come repeatedly, that this concept of tafarruqa, division, schism, parties, groups, is something that happens in the Ahl Kitab. And then finally, then we're going to come to the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that's going to happen to you also. It's going to happen to the Muslim Ummah as well. Okay, now, and this is slightly an answer to actually a question that somebody asked yesterday. Shara lakum min ad-deen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established for your sake, for your benefit, from what? The same deen, ad-deen. Ma wassa bihi Nuha, that the same deen that he enjoyed upon Nabi Nuh alayhi salam. The same deen that he enjoyed upon Nuh alayhi salam. Alright? وَالَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ, and that which we have sent by, we means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in all of his, maybe I should explain this to you also, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the we form, the singular plural form, Allah ta'ala is one. He uses the plural form to denote Allah ta'ala in all of his majesty, his attributes, his singular zat in all of his sifat. So one is an act of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every act emanates from his zat, from his essence. And some of the acts are specific to one of his attributes. So for example, if Allah ta'ala sends his maghfirah on us, the maghfirah is coming obviously from his essential being, his zat, but also then specifically from his attribute of maghfirah. But those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does that are not unique to any single attribute are coming, everything comes from his zat, his essence, but are from the totality of his attributes, so he uses the plural form. This is something very few people have seemed to understand. So the way you would try to put this English, when Allah Ta'ala says we, it means I, Allah Ta'ala, I'm speaking on sort of putting English words to explain how Allah Ta'ala is speaking in Quran al-Kareem. I, Allah Ta'ala, in all my might, in all my majesty, in all my knowledge, in all my forgiveness, in all my wisdom, in the totality of all my attributes, those that I've revealed to you and not revealed to you, those that are known only to me, I sent down wahi upon you. Awhayna ilayk. Alright? So in English, how do you capture all that? So the most translators, they just go with we, and most people ask, what does it mean that Allah Ta'ala refers to himself as we in Quran as opposed to I? Now you understand? Alright? Okay. Khair. وَمَا وَسَيْنَا بِهِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَإِيسَى. You know, the same. So this is the Quranic understanding also of this notion of Abrahamic faiths. This is not a Western concept. Yes, this is a Western concept. It's also a Quranic concept. That's a whole separate talk and presentation, how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has emphasized Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam in Quran al-Kareem, and definitely Ibrahim alayhi salam is the forefather of Musa alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi salam. Alright, fair. An aqimuddina, that each and every one of them were enjoined that that you should remain steadfast and firm and qa'im on top of deen. وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. And there should be no divisions, schisms made in that deen. So in this verse, actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying is that the deen of all of the Anbiya are one. Therefore, when the Ahl Kitab rejected Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they were doing tafarraq, they were making a division. That we have our deen, which is maybe Torah or Injil, our scripture, our deen, and this is some other deen. They're trying to say that's farq. They're separated. And Allah is saying, no, this is the same. Alright? Okay? Okay, and then the rest of the verse is about the mushrikeen. Alright? Kabra al-mushrikeen ma tad'uhum ilay, that it really weighs heavily on the idolaters, that how can they respond to that which you invite them to. Okay? Allah yastabi ilayhi man yasha'u wa yahdi ilayhi man yunib. Allah Ta'ala selects and chooses for himself whomsoever he wants, and he guides to him mayunib, whomever has inaba, whoever has a longing turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Khair, but that's not our topic for today. Alright. وَمَا تَفَرَّقُوا إِلَّا مِن بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْعِلْمُ. And the Ahl Kitab did not do tafarruq except after they had knowledge. So notice they didn't do it out of ignorance. They did it after having knowledge, after ilm. And the same thing is going to happen in the Ummah. The reason I'm mentioning all this to you is that when Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is going to say in the hadith that the Ummah is also going to split into these sects in the same way that the Jews and Christians did. What is that way? Allah Ta'ala is explaining in Quran. So the Muslims will also split into sects when? After they have ilm. Not because of ignorance. After they have knowledge. Alright? And why? بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. In self-serving malice and spite and envy and hatred for one another. So it will happen with ilm and with baghi. This is the same way it's going to happen with the believers. Okay. وَلَوْلَا كَلِمَةٌ سَبَقَتْ مِنْ رَبِّكَ إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ مُسَمَّى لَقُضِيَ بَيْنَهُمْ. Okay, so this is, you can understand maybe in a sense to answer the question that some people like to, so I'm sort of anticipating some questions that may come later, that why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it like this? Why didn't He decree it in such a way that Islam never split into sects? If Islam is the final religion, perfect religion, absolute religion, all of humanity has to be called to it, wouldn't have made more sense. But this is, so remember what I told you yesterday. Allah ta'ala has to, every act of Allah ta'ala has to be understood in light of all of His attributes. Every act, His attributes, His attribute of wisdom, His ahkam al-hakimin. You may think using your akal that it would have made more quote-unquote sense to you had Allah Ta'ala decreed that the ummah always remain exactly the same, that everybody prayed exactly the same, that everybody had exactly the same theology. It was in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this should not take place. And this will all be settled later on the Day of Judgment. And it's the same answer, which is a bit more intended here in the verse, same answer for why, what the person asked yesterday, that why are they multiple religions? This is the will and wish of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because we know He is infinitely wise, so we know every decision and act of His has infinite wisdom. Alright. وَإِنَّ الَّذِينَ أُورِثُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِمْ لَفِي شَكٍّ مِّنْهُ مُرِيبٍ. So basically those who have inherited the kitab after them are in shak. They're in doubt, skepticism, uncertainty, suspicion regarding it. Alright. Now, this is a verse, this is now the verses that are related to the believers. Okay, the initial meaning of this verse is actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is initially talking about the early ummah, Sahaba Kiram radiallahu ta'ala ajmain. But you should also know the important thing to tell you, every verse in Quran has umum in it. Every verse in Quran has a more general, universal meaning and application to it. Even if it was indeed revealed in a specific occasion of revelation or a particular context or in a particular incident in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the fact that it's in Quran, which is azali abadi, pre-eternal, eternal kalam, speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, means it has a universal, more broad meaning. And that's one of the great acts of scholarship, to extract those broader principles, those general principles, and then to apply those general principles to today's context, which is different from the Quran's context, today's context, today's circumstances, today's incidents. That is why you need Islamic scholarship. You can't just get that from translation. A person who just does translation has no idea even, was this ayah revealed in Makkah Mukarramah, Medina Munawwarah, before Fateh Makkah, after Fateh Makkah, before Hijrah, after Hijrah. Just translation does not alone give you the ability to extract correctly, without making mistakes, what are the universal principles in this ayah. Then to apply those universal principles to current context, this is why you always need living scholarship. Because yes, we accept that the context does change, the circumstance does change. Muslim scholars don't deny that we've entered the 21st century, but the universal teachings of Quran don't change. Right? Okay. Khair. So, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا, that you should all grasp fast, hold fast, jami'a, all together. So this notion of jami'a, jama'a, jama, all right? The collective, the plurality, grasping, the unity, right, of the collective. Hablillahi is a figurative expression. Literally, habl means rope, right? So rope is basically like, for example, if somebody's drowning and you cast them a rope, that's their lifeline. That's their only source of salvation, is the rope. So Allah Ta'ala has sent down a habl, which is deen of Islam, siratul mustaqim, and a person has to grab onto that. Okay. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and do not let yourself be divided. Here, it's a little bit of a stretch to say in this ayah, Allah Ta'ala by tafarruqu means the later theological sects, which I will show you that come in history. Here, it's a simple linguistic thing. Be steadfast and be together. Don't let yourself be divided. Okay? وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ, and remember the tremendous bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He sent upon you. إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً. So this is about the Aus and the Khazraj, the two tribes in Medina Munawwara. Before they accepted Islam, they were actually enemies to one another. And then, because of the barakah, blessing of deen of Islam, they became united to one another. And then they even accepted Muhajirun, people from Makkah and became united with them. So two locals who couldn't get along together got along with one another and got along with other people. Right? This is this transformative nature of the deen of Islam. Okay. But so the rest of the verse is on this. Right? I was just very quickly reading. فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala softened the feelings and placed ulfat and love and affection and mercy, tender feelings between your hearts, and then you woke up in the morning. I mean, literally it means you literally means you woke up in the morning. It means you then became, due to this bounty and favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِخْوَانًا. Right? You became brethren to one another, fellows, companions to one another. So this is explaining the benefits of not having sectarianism and not having skepticism. All right, the rest of the verse is there. Okay. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ تَفَرَّقُوا وَاخْتَلَفُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْبَيِّنَاتِ. That don't be like those people, تَفَرَّقُوا, who split up into divisions. وَاخْتَلَفُوا. Now another word is coming. اختلاف. Even that Allah Ta'ala doesn't want. Ikhtilaf. Alright? After they receive clear signs. Right? Now literally, this verse is actually referring to the Ahl Kitab. Alright? And this is another principle of tafsir, that the verses in Quran that are referring to the mushrikun, idolaters, pagans, or referring to the people of scripture, they cannot be applied in their same strength to believers. But they contain lessons in it that you can extract for believers. So the next part, وَأُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَذِيمٌ. This doesn't apply. So there was an extreme, and I will be showing you that later, an extreme particular sect, not everyone, but there's an extreme branch of Wahhabism, which said that because of this verse, well, okay, there's ikhtilaf, and the Hanafis and Malikis have ikhtilaf with one another. Therefore they will get what? أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَذِيمٌ. But it's not like that. Right? You can take lessons from this, that it's not good to have ikhtilaf. And I will also have to explain to you there's a difference between khilaf and ikhtilaf. Khilaf means to have differing opinion. Ikhtilaf means to have opposition to one another due to the differing opinion. So khilaf is acceptable in religion, in scholarship, not religion, sorry. Khilaf is acceptable in scholarship because obviously there will be multiple perspectives, different interpretations that scholars bring to bear. But there should not be a means of ikhtilaf between them. Alright? And for the majority of history, let's take for example within the Sunni theology, the different legal epistemologies, which is a fancy word, means for Pakistanis prefer to use the term schools of thought. I've never been fond of that, but I've put that in the presentation for your sake. I rather call them collective legal epistemologies. They had a khilaf with one another. They had different understandings of certain legal principles, right? And then their application. But they're not meant to have ikhtilaf with one another. They're not meant to oppose one another. All right? And that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to here in the Quran. And again, remember, the reason I'm showing the verses in Quran about Ahl Kitab is because the hadith that is going to come is going to say this phenomenon is going to happen in the Ummah in the manner in which it happened, like it happened with the Ahl Kitab. Alright? Okay. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا. Indeed, those who فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ, that they create divisions in their very deen. So now this is about theology then. It's not difference in law. It's not difference in interpretation of Quran. It's not difference in grading of hadith. Difference in deen means what we would in English call a theological difference. Difference in core theological beliefs. You can call it aqaid in Arabic. Alright? And now you have another word. So we had faraqaf, right? We've had ikhtilaf. Root is khalam, fa. And now you have another interesting word. And it's not really my topic today, but it's actually very interesting that all of you know the Muslims Ummah, the 1.5 billion Muslims on earth, are split into two main groups, Sunni and Shia. And you would at least raise a question that why in the world would you want to use a name for yourself, a word that Allah Ta'ala has mentioned in Quran in a negative way. And Allah Ta'ala said that don't do this. Right? And those who do this, lasta minhum fi shay'in, innama amruhum ilallah, thumma yunabbi'uhum bima kanu yaf'alun. So a few things to understand here. Alright? First of all, Allah Ta'ala is telling Sayyidina Rasul, because again, remember, this verse is about the Ahl Kitab. This verse is not about Sunnis and Shias. Okay? The word Shia is being used in a lexical, linguistic sense. Allah Ta'ala is telling Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you have nothing to do with them. Lasta minhum fi shay. Alright? You have no role in this, no part in this. You don't have to deal with them. They're all splitting up into many different Christian denominations, Jewish denominations. They're taking different reactions to you. They have issues with one another. All of them have issues with you. You have nothing to do with that. Innama amruhum ilallah. Indeed, their matter is to be referred to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yunabbi'uhum, and He will, ultimately means that on the Day of Judgment, that He will inform them bima kanu yaf'alun, about the reality of every single thing they did. Now, if you take this verse and you extract the principle from this and apply it to Muslim sectarianism, it's the same thing. In other words, in this world, so maybe I should speak a bit slower now. Because I did all this fast so that the other things now I could speak to you, but in a slower way. Alright? In this world, you are not going to be able to entirely, absolutely, decisively, categorically resolve the issue of sectarianism within the Muslims. The existence of sectarianism is the will and wish of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ultimately, if Allah Ta'ala wishes on the Day of Judgment, He may just send everybody to Jannah who is within the core theology. That's coming. I'm going to show you there's certain limits. Every religion has limits of tolerance. Has tolerance, has pluralism, but has limits to that tolerance and pluralism. Every religion has borders and boundaries. Okay? I will show you that in detail throughout a bit later on today. But anyone and everyone who is within those broader limits, but may be viewed as having some type of division from one another, Allah Ta'ala it's Allahu Alam, He may just send all of them to Jannah. But He may also do this, He may inform them of what the truth was, and He may do both. He may do both. Alright? Okay. Similar ayah. مِنَ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا kullu hizbin. Yeah, I put this because there's yet a fourth word. So tafarraq, ikhtilaf, shia, and now hizb. Alright? وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا كُلُّ حِزْبٍ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ. Alright. So again, from those who split up their deen. And you can see this in some ways. I mean, I don't want to pick on them because it's not entirely true. But to some extent, those of you who know about the current state of global Christianity, there are a lot of, so the word they use is denomination, right? So the first broad split is Catholic, Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant. All right. Within the Orthodox, you've got the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Coptics, etc. Catholic is pretty much one actually umbrella. Okay, there may be different schools of interpretation and scholarship, but you have the Catholics, they all accept the Pope. All right. The different Orthodox schools have their own like Pope equivalent, patriarch. All right. Then you have the Protestants. The Protestants, those of you more aware, if you spent any time, especially in America, have a lot of different denominations. You have the Baptists, you have the Presbyterians, you have the Lutherans, you have the Unitarians, quite interestingly, who are a bit more into Tawheed. You have the Mormons, you have, it goes on, right? And interesting, every one of them is truly happy, all right? بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ, right? They're actually very happy and content. Now, some people say this, that, oh, well, you know, look, all these Protestant different denominations, they all get along fine, they're all happy, and they get along well with the Catholics, which is not always exactly true, by the way, in terms of their religious scholars definitely have, you know, very interesting discussion with one another, right? And if you know anything about history, a lot of the wars in Europe were fought based on religion. A lot, right? And most recently, perhaps Ireland is the case of Protestant versus Catholic fighting. Okay? But anyway, so this is another word, right? That I wanted to show you. Okay. Yeah. Now the last place I want to show you, the last verse, and then we're going to do the famous hadith, and then I'm going to give you some comments. All right. This is a verse in which the word is going to come. Faraqaf, the word will come. But here it doesn't mean actually, and this is why I'm pointing it out, in this verse it does not mean sect or theological group or theological division. Okay? This verse is about the believers. وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً, that it does not befit the believers. In other words, the believers shall not, they should not, what? لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً, that they should, all the believers go out entirely. So this was a verse actually in the Madani period about going out to defend the deen of Islam against the hostile aggressors, pagans of Mecca, who were sending their armies toward Medina Munawwara to attack and kill the Prophet ﷺ and destroy and eradicate Islam from the face of the earth. So now that I've told you the context, you would understand that at that moment, all the companions, all the Sahaba in Medina Munawwara felt that we should all go out to meet that army, right? So that Allah Ta'ala sent revelation to the Prophet ﷺ, part of Quran, and said, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً. No, all the believers should not go out, should not march forth entirely. All of them should not do that. Why? فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٌ. So this is yet another word now that has come, ta'ifa. So every, you can say, he's using the word contingent, or you can say group. From every firqa, so I will actually suggest to you, from every clan, tribe, cultural group, linguistic group, Aus, Khazraj, Muhajir, Ansar, from every tabaka, if you will, from every socio-economic, social, cultural, linguistic, ethnic strata of the ummah, of the Sahaba, right? There should be a group, not just one. There should be a ta'ifa, a few individuals from all of them that stay back, that don't go forth to defend. What will they do, the ones who stay back? لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. They should get tafaqquh. Today, what we call fiqh. Tafaqquh is the act of learning, understanding, analyzing fiqh. Tafaqquh, fiqh. Fiqh means deep understanding of religion. Not just legal. It's not just law. complete scholastic understanding of the Quran and Sunnah. So Allah Ta'ala in the Quran taught the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and Sahaba Ikram that scholarship and scholasticism is a dedicated activity. It is so full time that even if it's Madani Jihad, this group should stay back and not go forth. Right? The second thing that becomes clear from this verse is that it's a particular community. So some people say, there's no particular scholarly group in Islam. Yeah, there is. Even the word al-ulama come in Quran, right? Let alone how it has come many times in Hadith. Okay. Why? Why will they? What are they going to do? So they're going to stay back and they're going to do the tafaqquh fi din. Then, وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ. And when the Sahaba come back, their qawm, their people, their jama'ah, their ummah, comes back from defending Islam, this group who stayed back will do indhar. Indhar means they will be the ones who warn them and guide them. So within the Quran, it is clear that Allah Ta'ala is creating two categories of Sahaba. One will be the scholarly class, who is full-time dedicated to fiqh and tafaqquh, and they will be the ones who guide the others. The others will be guided by them, warned by them, literally. Okay? لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ, so that they can be protected and guarded against doing anything khilaf shara, against fiqh, going astray in any manner. All right? So the reason I highlighted this to you is that because some people wrongly say that the word firqa here means sect. Here the word firqa is just being used for different strata of that society at that time. All right. Now comes the famous hadith. This is like the sadly speaking, this is the most famous hadith in Pakistan amongst university youth. If there's the number one question, probably it came yesterday also. It was not even the topic yesterday. It came yesterday also. I wasn't even the topic yesterday. The famous hadith about the 72 out of 73 sects. 73 sects. 72 going one way, Nar Jahannam, and one going into Jannah. Right? Okay. So let's look at this hadith. It's a little bit small perhaps for you. Here, I put all the Arabic in. Sorry. What did I do? Which one? Which one do I press? We'll be currently, but I'm going to talk about this from my. Okay. So I will. Okay, you can put part 2 in there if you want, but yeah. Okay. All right. Inna min qablakum min ahl al-kitabi iftaraku ala thintaini wa sab'ina milla. That indeed the ahl al-kitab prior to you iftaraku, faraqaf, split up into 72 different sects. Right? وَإِنَّ هَذِهِ الْمِلَّةِ, and indeed this millah, millat of Islam, right, will سَتَفْتَرِكُ عَلَى ثَلَاثَ وَسَبْعِينَ, will divide itself into 73 divisions. Okay? Thintani wa sab'una finnar, 72 of them will be in the hellfire. Wa wahida, and one of them fil jannah, will go to Jannah. Wa hiya al jama'a, and that one that will go into Jannah has been called al jama'a. Al jama'a. All right. This hadith has been narrated in several different places. One is in the collection of the Sunan of Abu Dawood, where it is under modern numbering systems, number 4597. And its grading, it has been graded as Sahih by Ibn Hajar Asqalani as well as by Ibn Taymiyyah. as well as by Ash-Shatibi and Al-Iraqi. All right, and it is also narrated by Imam At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala in his Al-Jami, and in the modern numbering scheme, that is hadith number 2641. But in that narration of Imam At-Tirmidhi, there's some extra words, and the extra words that come at the end, ma ana alayhi wa ashabi. No, but we want the last slide of the first one. We're not on the new one yet. Okay. Okay, I got it from current slide.
This is the second part. This is part 2. The one that
ठीक है, it's there. नहीं नहीं, this is
उसकी last slide दूसरी वाली जो वो
हाँ.
check बोला
Call the. All right. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So there's the Arabic that I recited for you. These are the references. Abu Dawud, Al-Hakim, it's also there as Mustadrak. All right. And then the different ulama of hadith who have created it to be authentic and sound. Okay. So this is an English translation I made for you. Indeed, before you, the people of Scripture, the Ahl Kitab, divided iftaraku into 72 religious denominations, millah. And indeed, this religious community, this millah, yani of Islam, will divide into 73 sects, 72 of which will be in the hellfire, nar, and one in heaven, Jannah. And that one will be, quote, the Jama'ah. All right. The following extra words are in the narration transmitted by At-Tirmidhi, which is ma ana alayhi wa ashabi, that which I, yani the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, am upon, and my companions ashabi are upon. All right? Okay. First, let me explain this a little bit so you also understand. And that is that Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam many times said certain things more than once. Right? And you can imagine, like, this type of teaching seems to be a very important teaching and would be something that he would have said on more than one occasion. Like any other human being, even Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would not necessarily always use the exact same words in the exact same sequence when he would say the same thing. So let's say I teach the same course in some other country, right? Even with the same slides, same notes, same slides, same notes, I won't say the exact same words, right? And sometimes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave some additional knowledge. More normally, the ulama of hadith understand that this happens to a number of reasons. One reason it may be that at a later time, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had said this, Allah Ta'ala by that time had given him this additional information, so he gave these additional words. Sometimes another reason can be that they're different narrators of the hadith. One of them remembered up to here, and the others remembered that, oh, there was a few more words, right? Now the hadith scholars in that case understand that then that was just one occasion, but they still preserve the report of the first one who only heard up to the first point, just as a matter of historical record, because for them they were part of the hadith activity was just to document the historical record of everything that every companion narrated that they heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whether they heard it partially or they heard it completely. And it's by documenting what every companion heard that they were then able to comparatively assess all those companion reports of narrations with one another, and then determine the gradings and authenticity of hadith and the textual and to give a hierarchy to the textual variants of hadith. All right? And if you don't understand that, that's no problem, because this is enough for you to understand that hadith scholarship is an extremely very fine science. Okay? All right. Now, What did Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam mean by these 73 sects? Some people have tried to track this historically, right? So the first thing you would do is, let me see if I can study the history of Judaism and the history of Christianity and study the different denominations that they have and try to see which one of them were really based on core theological beliefs, and then I will call it a separate sect, right? That's not something I've done, right? I cannot honestly today tell you what's the core theological difference between a Baptist and an Anglican and a Presbyterian and a Lutheran. I have no idea. It's not my field of study. But there are some who have tried to identify those 72. It may be a worthwhile research project. Maybe we would learn something from the way that they split up, and maybe we could guard ourselves against having such schism and separation ourselves. Secondly, others have tried to look at the second part of the hadith historically and looked at, from the earliest period of Islamic history up till now, what were the different groups that emerged who had unique or different or contradictory core theological beliefs, right? And so some have tried to make a list of them, and obviously they're trying to make the list reach number 72, right? And obviously they want that whatever they choose to follow should be the one, right? Okay, now what are some broad principles you learn from this hadith? Number one is what I told you, which is coming later, is that there is a limit. And here clearly, 72 have crossed the limits. So they have somehow, this is nothing to do with tolerance and pluralism and plurality and diversity. There's 72 groups in history, but there's still a future to come, right? So that's one of the flaws by the historical method, assumes it's already been done. There may still be many things, we don't know what's going to happen between now and the day of judgment. But we know that whatever in the entire lifetime of the Ummah, there will be 72 different theological, and I keep saying this to you, it's an issue of aqeedah, it's not an issue of kalam or fiqh or tasawwuf, and I will show you some of that. That's not what this is talking about. It is talking about aqaid, theological beliefs. Okay? Alright. But the core lesson we get is, yes, a person could cross the boundary and end up in a theological belief that puts them into the fire of Jahannam. Alright? Now, obviously, the additional words, everybody would understand that. That obviously, Ana, Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself is obviously going to be in that one group that goes to Jannah. And his ashab, his companions, at least for Sunnis, right, are going to be amongst those who go into Jannah. So this is also, if you will, one of the, I wouldn't say the first, but one of the fundamental theological differences between Sunnis and Shias. Part of core Shia theology. I'm not talking about secular, liberal, English-speaking Shia friends that you may have in Karachi. I'm talking about core classical Shia theological texts, right? Not one of them, all of them. For example, if I told you there's something that is written by Imam Ghazali and Shafi and Abu Hanifa, and it's in all the commentaries of the Hadith of Bukhari, and all the Sunni scholars of Tafsir wrote it, right? If it's some teaching that is found in all of classical and medieval Sunni scholarship, then even as a historian, it would be fair to call that Sunni theology, right? As a researcher, how will you identify what is, quote-unquote, Sunni theology? You will go and look in their books. Just like that, if you want to identify what is, in quote-unquote, Shia theology, you're not going to look at what maybe contemporary secular liberal Shias today may say or think or believe. You're going to go to historically. You're going to go to the classical and medieval scholastic works. All of the classical and medieval Shia works say that other than, and they differ between them in the numbers, 7, 9, 11, 13, these are some numbers that I remember when I once upon a time researched. It's a very small number of Sahaba who are going to go to Jannah. And then the vast majority of Sahaba are going to go to Jahannam. Right? So this is a core theological difference. So you're getting an idea of what a theological belief is. Okay. Now, let's move to the next one. Right. Okay. So I want to give you some examples then from what we do know in terms of history, actual groups, firaq, right? Actual groups who had actual theological beliefs, which they themselves wrote about. Nobody is attributing something to them. They have their own books, their own authors. They wrote and defended their particular theological beliefs, right? So from the Sunnis is the first line. I will give you an example of some. Jahmiya, Qadariya, Karramiya, and there are others. Okay, Jabariya. So these are groups that existed within the very first 3 centuries of Islam, and they articulated very particular theological beliefs. For example, some of them believed in free will only, some of them believed in predestination only, some of them had other theological views about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes, some of them had theological views. For example, the Mujassima, they're not mentioned here, they thought Allah ta'ala had a physical body and Allah ta'ala had a physical hand, right? So they actually ventured in the realm of theology. It's not tafsir, not explanation, exegesis of Quran, it's not commentary of hadith, it's not legal interpretation, it's theology, right? Similarly, in the Shia world, you have these groups, Ithna Ashari, otherwise known as Ja'fari. In English, they're called 12er Shias. They have a very expanded theological concept of the imama, of what is an imam. So it's a new category of person. So for Sunnis, there's Anbiya, there's Sahaba, there's Awliya. We have some categories, right? They have another, and they're all these words are in Quran, right? Khair Sahab, the word Sahaba in that sense is in Quran, but the reference to the companions, Alladhina Ma'ak, those who are with you, they're referred to in Quran. Okay? Zaydi and Ibadi and Ismaili, some of the differences between and amongst them is which Imams they accept, where they think the Imama ended. So for example, the Zaydis think the Imama ended at the 5th one. The Ismailis think the Imama ended at the 7th one, as you know, even in the city. Then there's a further split between them, between Al-Khani and Dawud Bori, right? And the Ithna Ashari believe the Imam ended at 12. So this is an example. It's not my topic for today, who they are and what they are, right? But just to show you that historically, clearly, this is a phenomenon that has happened in Muslim history. That there were groups that self-identified themselves as groups, selected these names for themselves, and believed and wrote and defended particular theological beliefs that were different from all of the others around them. Okay? So this is something that has happened. That is what is called sectarianism in Islam. That is what is called tafarruqa in Islam. That is what is being referred to in all of those verses of Quran that I showed you earlier. And that is what the Prophet ﷺ is referring to when he says that this is going to happen in my ummah in the same way that it happened in the people of the book, yani the Jews and the Christians. All right. This should be contrasted. So I told you I used the favored expression of the Pakistani, schools of thought. All right. Schools of thoughts are not firqa, are not tafarruqa. So in Urdu, this is not firqa wariyat, because these are not different theological beliefs. So the first type of school of thought is called kalam. I showed you a bit of this yesterday. Kalam is the philosophy of religion. It's not aqaid. It's kalam. It's different. It's the philosophy of religion, right? So why does evil exist? They may have given slightly different answers as to what is God's wisdom behind creating evil, right? They may have different answers on how much evil can you rationally identify, right? They may have slightly different answers on the fitra. Can the fitra know everything to be evil, or does it need sharia on certain things, etc., etc., right? This is kalam. So the three famous groups so now I'm talking about Sunni schools of thought. So Ashari, Maturidi, and Athari. But they all are considered within the one theological group. And obviously they all consider themselves in the Al-Jama'ah. Alright? In fiqh, they were, broadly speaking, 5 that have survived until today, but there are about 15 or 20 that existed throughout history. Different schools of legal thought. So the five that have survived today are the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, and what I call the Taymiyi, and they call themselves the Salafi. So those who basically follow Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya rahimahullah ta'ala. Others which did not survive were, for example, the school of Sufyan al-Thawri, Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, and others. Okay? Zahiri as well, right? Dawud, not Abu Dawud al-Zahiri, who later had one successor, Ibn Hazm, but then after Ibn Hazm it died away. There are several others, right? But I just gave the names of the ones that still exist. To some extent, Ash'ari, Maturidi, and Athari still exist. To a large extent, Ash'ari and Maturidi Kalam was really an effort to repel the Greek philosophical movement and the Mu'tazili school. And when they were successful at those two things, they're still around, but they're not that active anymore. And if you remember from yesterday, I suggested we actually need to return to this discipline known as Kalam in order to address atheism, agnosticism, and scientism, and other challenges to faith and iman. So that is one very important aspect of Ilm al-Kalam, is to refute challenges to iman from people outside the religion. All right? And that is something that the Ash'ari and Maturidis did. The Atharis were a slight response to them. The Atharis were, you can say, a bit more conservative, traditional, orthodox, textual-based movement. And they felt that in the sincere defense of iman and faith, the Ash'aris, especially the Ash'aris, took things a little bit too far, right? And that we need to bring them back and be a bit more literally grounded in the texts, all right? And they weren't altogether wrong. They weren't altogether right. The truth lies basically with all of these. And I would say the same thing in fiqh. There's no single one fiqh that has all of the truth in it. But overall, all the truth lies in all of these things. So the Taymi and Salafi movement, again, was a reaction against some of the certain excessive tendencies within Hanafi, Maliki, Shafis, and Hanbalis to overly rigidly adhere to any particular legal principle, right? But, those tendencies were not as pronounced or as widespread as some of the Taymiyyah and Salafi rhetoric suggests, but they were present. So the response did not come out of nowhere. It was not entirely unwarranted. And again, today I would suggest a blend of all of this really is where the truth lies. I'm not saying blend that for people like you can mix and match madhab. That's something I talked about in the winter study course 1. One is that one is deep scholarly reality, and one is what individuals do. All right? Okay. For example, the shifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lies in a blend of Western medicine, homeopathy, acupuncture, Indian herbal medicine, Greek herbal medicine, and who knows, many in African herbal medicine and many other things. But for you as an individual to blend 6, 7 types of those medicine in your one body is not a course of action I would prescribe for you. Okay. All right. Now we move to... Hold on. I had some more comments on this. If I move to that. Fair. Okay. Go ahead. Because we're not... Yeah. Non-Muslims. So obviously non-Muslim is something that's not an issue of sectarianism, right? That is something that's... So now you may see... Okay, let me pause here now. Now I want to show you a very subtle thing. I'm just going to ask a question, and I'm not going to try to claim to give you the answer today. Every theological sect that will arise in the millah, because if you look at the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ did say it will be from inside the millah, right? So the millah means Islam. Every one of those 72 theological sects, and Allah Ta'ala knows best ultimately which ones they are, that are going to arise from within the millah of Islam, that are going to go to the fire of Jahannam, does it necessarily mean that they are non-Muslim? Not necessarily, right? Because we have hadith about individuals who are Muslim who will go to the fire of Jahannam, right? There's a Muslim who In fact, Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the Miraj, where otherwise everything he saw was absolutely amazing, he was also given a peek behind the scenes look into a future temporal dimension of what will be happening in Jahannam. And there were Muslims in there, individuals. I'm talking about the communities, not schools of thought or theological sects. The Muslim who did zina, the Muslim who did ghiba. There's so many hadith about individual Muslims, right? So we know, so remember, those of you here in the very first winter study course, if you remember, I did something called the workshop. So I said that you have to understand all of the verses of Quran and all of the hadith of the Sunnah in light of one another. So from other hadith, we know that there will be individual Muslims who go to Jahannam. Otherwise, if we thought that only non-Muslims go to Jahannam, then we would have to say, yes, every one of those 72 sects must be declared non-Muslim. On what basis? Because they're going to Jahannam, right? It could be that some of those 72 sects have theological beliefs that are so far outside the acceptable borders, even how much tolerance you use. I told you everything has limits. So what I'm going to show you in the second half today is that we don't know for sure about every theological sect, but we do know for sure about some of them. And one of them we definitely know for sure about is this group that is known as Mirzais and Qadianis. Okay? So that will come in part 2, where I will actually show you the limits of theological tolerance. And I will show you what those borders are. And I will actually try to show you that you cannot stretch them any further. Any theological sect that definitely, clearly crosses that border, about that theological sect, we will easily say that they are no longer Muslim. Then there may be some other theological sects that they have some theological beliefs that are very different, but we're not sure if it puts them outside the border or not. But it may still put them in the fire of Jahannam for who knows how long, right? And therefore we still need to invite people away from such theological beliefs. Now, have you understood this, right? Okay. Then there's another group of humans, non-Muslims, that it's not a question. They themselves say they're not. So it's nothing about trying to figure out, right? As you would know, when you hear these statistics that there's almost 7 billion people in the world and 1.5 billion of them are Muslim, that means that 5.5 billion people in the world themselves identify themselves as not being Muslim. I think all of you understand that, right? Okay? This is not, saying this is not intolerance or, right? This is fact. This is census data. This is a social reality, okay? So the first type of non-Muslim is the non-Muslim who's living in a non-Muslim land, in a non-Muslim majority. So today we live in a world of nation states, all right? What does Islam say about them? Islam says you can live completely peacefully with them. You can be in complete peace with them. You can trade with them. You can meet them. You can visit them, right? There's so many things you can do with them. It just says one thing. It says a few things. Number one, if they attack you physically, or in some other way they try to attack your religion, maybe by trying to spread some type of Western hedonism through some type of, R-rated or X-rated media, right? You must counter that effort. You must counter and repel every effort of theirs, if any such effort exists, to the extent it exists, to threaten your religion. And in fact, if you ask me, in this day and age, it is actually much more a war of ideas and a war of scholarship. All right? No doubt there are places in the world where there are physical injustices happening, and then that would require physical response and physical countering and physical repulsion. But in a much broader scale, it's a war of ideas. And that's something I mentioned to you yesterday. One idea that is being exported is atheism, right? And therefore, now again, we can have complete peace and trade, and we can have lunch with the atheist. But at the same time, we're going to completely counter and repel the atheist ideology in order to safeguard and protect the Muslim individuals, the Muslim faith, from anything that can try to attack and undermine the religion. All right? Okay. Then there's another type of non-Muslim who is living in a Muslim majority country. So they're non-Muslim minorities in Muslim lands. So this is one thing that comes up then a lot in Pakistan, right? So it should be very clear that if you look in history, there's not something new. This is a very big mistake that people make. They think this question of non-Muslim minorities is something Jinnah discovered, and therefore he made part of the flag white. For 1400 years, this has happened in the Muslim world. And there are many, many noble examples of that. I will give you two. The Jews, the Jewish historians say that the three greatest periods of Jewish history was one, obviously, when they were the children of Israel, before the time of the Prophet Muhammad, even before the time of the Prophet Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, okay? That was obviously the greatest period in life. And the Quran, Allah Ta'ala also says that we had selected you over everyone and we had sent our special favors on you. Allah Ta'ala says that many times in Surah Baqarah. Second, they say, was the Jews who lived in Muslim Ottoman Empire and Muslim Spain. Means the second greatest period of our life was when we were living under Muslim rule. And then the third is the contemporary state of Israel. All right? So it means 2 out of 3 are when they were living in their own Jewish state. And the third one is when they were living in Muslim lands. No doubt, if you also look at history, there have been, even between Jews and Christians, even between Protestants and Catholics, and yes, also between Muslims and Christians, many wars, many incidents in which they did not get along peacefully. Whether you look at the Crusades, whether you look at the Inquisition, there are many things, right? At the same time, there are many, many incidents, and this is a whole course actually. This itself should be a whole course that is taught, just purely from a historical basis. But to learn from the lessons of the peaceful history, to replicate that, and to also learn from the lessons where wars or fighting took place, violence took place, to not replicate that, right? Both, you will find both in history, all right? So as far as non-Muslim minorities in Muslim lands today, they have every human right that every Muslim citizen has, all right? Now there's the only one question that sometimes arises is that can the non-Muslim be the leader of a Muslim state? A non-Muslim could be the leader of a secular Muslim state. A non-Muslim would not be able to be the leader of an Islamic Muslim state. Why? If there is any political entity or state that has chosen, and Pakistan has not chosen that just by saying the word Islamic Republic or having the word Islam maybe a dozen times in the constitution. That's just words, right? Pakistan doesn't follow this, right? Pakistan is a secular Muslim state. This is a separate topic to explain, because the religious people maybe don't understand that, and the secular people also don't understand that. The secular people always try to pray that they're victims and we're living in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Whereas, all the entire bureaucracy is secular, judges are secular, police is secular. If you look at all the power holders and stakeholders in this country, none of them are quote-unquote Islamic. They may be Muslim, I'm not saying what they are as individuals, but they're not operating on some Islamic model. They're operating on totally other secular models, in fact, very corrupt models that have nothing to do with secularism either. They're just corrupt, right? This whole country is just about elitism. There are different types of elites, whether military elites, civilian elites, bureaucracy elites, and they're all basically trying to have a monopoly on the power and the wealth of this country. That's your whole country in 2 sentences. Clear? That's a different topic, all right? But if there was a society that forms a political community, and they choose and they want themselves that the organization of that state and society should be based on Islam, then obviously somebody who believes in Islam is going to definitely be better qualified than someone who doesn't believe in Islam to lead this project. So then it would become one of the criteria for selection. Don't you see in the corporate world, if you go into the interview and tell them that I do not believe in the vision, mission statement I read on your website, will you hire me? Huh? What do you think they will do? Will they hire you? There's no way they will hire you. No way. And that's just not to be the leader. That's just to be a member of that organization. Imagine if you were trying to apply for the position to lead the organization, which is the leader of the state, right? And you said, I don't agree with your first principles. I don't agree with your ethics, your values, your norms. I may share some of them, but I don't agree with all of them. Because if you agree with all of them, that means you convert to Islam, right? There must be something that a non-Muslim doesn't agree with. So then they're not as qualified for the project of leader of an Islamic state as a Muslim is. And believe me, 99.999% of non-Muslims would happily accept this as well. Because they're very honest people. They will tell you, yes, of course, so just like we wouldn't pick you to be the head of the Catholic Church, right? I say, make me Pope, right? Let's say I say I'm more honest, or I'm better, I'll manage the Vatican Bank better. I can give many reasons. But there's one core reason why you can't be Pope. I say, well, why? Because you're not Catholic, right? Do you understand? That's it. Other than that absolute position of leadership, can a non-Muslim be vice president? Yes. Can a non-Muslim be any, whatever, anything else? Yes. And if it's not a truly, purely Islamic society and state, then a non-Muslim can be leader also. What difference does it make? All right? Okay. Khair, but that could be something we could discuss further. All right? But the point is to tell you that minorities in Muslim land, there is no inherent discrimination or prejudice against non-Muslim minorities built into the Islamic religion, which is something that is often falsely spread. Not even is this falsely spread by non-Muslims. This is falsely spread by non-practicing secular Muslims. And that's a big tragedy, right? Okay. Now comes the issues of boundaries. And now we're going to gradually move our way to the blasphemy issue. All right? Okay. भाई आप वीडियो तो नहीं ले रहे ना? तस्वीर तो नहीं बना रहे? किसी तरह भी? अगर किसी तरह बनाए तो डिलीट कर लें. ठीक है ना? Okay. खैर, एक दफ़ा मैंने कह दिया, that's fine. Boundaries. All right? So there's going to be two forces here that are at play. One will be certain forces that try to expand the boundaries, right? And then the second force will be those which make sure that through expanding, the boundary doesn't collapse. So if you imagine I take a rubber band, I keep expanding it. That's one force. But at some point I have to stop, otherwise the rubber band will collapse. It will no longer have any integrity itself. It will become a broken rubber band. So both forces are going to be here. All right? Okay. So the forces that obviously are going to try to expand the boundaries are the first four: pluralism, diversity, multiplicity, and tolerance. Okay? Now pluralism has existed, from the very earliest periods of Islam. Even in the lifetime of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sahabe Kiram sometimes gave him different mashwara on certain battle strategies, on certain ways to how to negotiate terms of peace with the enemy, right? This is all there if you verse with Sirah. And he accepted that, and he encouraged that, and he was happy to hear that. There are even cases in which he would accept or agree with the advice given by one companion, but then before the Prophet ﷺ could enact it, Allah Ta'ala would send wahi and revelation and direct him to a different course of action. Right? So in that sense, pluralism and diversity is there. Multiplicity, I'm sorry, there's the L is missing there, multiplicity. All right? Now, I'm all these words are pretty much the same. I'm using them for something different. Okay? By multiplicity, I'm specifically talking about groups now. One is individuals, right? Giving different opinions. One is now you have different groups. So I showed you that earlier, for example, Ashari, Maturidi, Athari, Hanafi, Maliki, etc. And in other ways also, in many other dimensions, you have different groups. Okay? So there's always been multiplicity from the very earliest period of Islam. They're supposed to have tolerance with one another, even within and amongst Muslims. Again, this would be another semester course in history. There have been cases where Muslims of diverse views, living in a pluralist society, and many of them, multiple such groups, got along peacefully. And there have been cases in history where that didn't happen. and they didn't get along peacefully, and there were incidents of violence between and amongst them. Both are there in history. Again, both have to be studied, right? Okay. But that force that allows people to get along with one another is called tolerance. Now, I want to make this clear. Tolerance still exists even if the other human being is a non-Muslim. Tolerance, the teaching of tolerance in Islam is not only within and among believers. And that's why I told you there are histories and contemporary contexts where Muslims and non-Muslims can live together and tolerate one another. All right? Okay. The next two things, however, is that when it comes to a religion, yarhamukallah, there has to be limits. Right? And if you cross those limits, that will be called what? Unbelief or kufr. Right? Now here, there's two aspects. One is the theoretical and one is the practical. Theoretically, we may be able to call a particular aqidah, particular belief, kufr. Am I necessarily going to practically apply that category to an individual? That's called takfir, right? Am I going to actually declare someone or some group an unbeliever? These two don't always go. Sometimes you may do that, and sometimes you may just say that it is unbelief and you may not apply it. So I have to make that not every case of kufr leads to takfir. Most people think that no, they're lazim al-zoom. That anytime you know that someone has a belief that causes unbelief, you must then automatically, immediately, necessarily declare them to be an unbeliever. Right? It depends on the type of unbelief. Okay? So this is stuff that's coming in the afternoon session. All right? And again, as you all are anticipating, and I've already revealed to you, one example of the kind of unbelief that not only is kufr, but must be called out and declared as such, is the Mirzai Qadiani movement and belief. Okay? All right. Now, but so that I'm going to do in the afternoon session. Now this issue of blasphemy. All right? So here we have actually quite a lot of material. I now have to look at this. Okay. So first to understand the definition. So there are many different aspects to blasphemy. Blasphemy can mean to actually blaspheme against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to say some words that are inappropriate, harsh, foul about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Blasphemy can be about the Quran al-Kareem. Some of you may know there were incidents, very, very small, minor incidents of one random, not in any way representative, right? You should never think that because you see it in the news. One totally random, isolated quack pastor in Florida burning a few pages of Quran, right? But that would be considered blasphemy against Quran, right? A third type would obviously be blasphemy against Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there can be other ways. You can desecrate somebody's grave. So there's a whole range of things that a person could do, right? Even under simple, even secular liberals, even basic human rights would view these things as offensive and wrong. But the next question, which comes in the next line, is which of these will be declared a crime? All right? Now, crime, you can say one theological crime, which is sin, right? Religious crime means sin. Or second would be legally crime. In terms of declared as a crime by the state, means a punishable offense, right? And in that case, then what exactly will be the process? What will be the evidentiary requirement? What level of proof and evidence do you need to establish that the person is guilty of the crime? What will the sentencing for that crime be? What exactly will it be? Will it be a fine? Will it be years in jail? Will it be life imprisonment? Will it be capital punishment? Will it be punishment by death? All right? And if it's a religious crime, sin, can they make tawbah? Can they repent from that? Is there some process for them to repent to that? Or is it some type of sin that even if they repent for it, it doesn't matter, they will still be doomed to be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment? All right? So the religious sense of crime, sin has a whole other than discussion that we have to look at, and the legal sense of crime, sin has a whole other discussion that we have to look at. Then the next word which I put non-Muslims is actually, in Islam, if a Muslim commits blasphemy against Islam in any of the ways I said, it's treated differently then if a non-Muslim commits blasphemy against Islam, this is another factor then to be looked at, all right? And then the final thing that you see there is scholarly positions. So the reason I've put that there is that because what you will see is that different scholars have different views. Because this issue of blasphemy is not absolutely definitively settled and decided by Allah Ta'ala in Quran al-Kareem. And even, and I'll show you some hadith, the issue has not been definitively decided by the hadith or the practice of the companions, and it is also not unanimously agreed upon by later fuqaha, later jurists. So then if you take a step back, in a different sense, you're going to have pluralism of scholarship, diversity of scholarship, multiplicity of scholarship, some advocating for more tolerance, some setting more limits, some even declaring blasphemy to be unbelief. All right? Now, when you have such a wide range, so I'm telling you this, and I'm going to start showing you some of it, that when you have such a wide range that's going to occur, so another question arises, which is the next slide, is that is there any sense that we will talk about the 21st century? Is there any sense that context will play a role? Is there any sense that society, in what type of society does blasphemy occur? Right? Will that play a role? Is there any sense that the state, if it's a more quote-unquote Islamic state, it's a more secular state, will that play a role? And quote-unquote this notion of the global village, universal human rights, or that these things will have an effect on your society or your international relations or your dealings with non-Muslim countries. Does that play a role or not play a role? Right? Some would say none of this plays a role. Some of people will use this slide as the determining factors for their position on blasphemy. And some will try to see if it should be incorporated, whether it should be incorporated, and to what extent it should be incorporated, and assign it a role, but perhaps a limited role. All right? Okay. So let me show you now how some of this would work. Let me first show you some hadith. All right? Okay. So, okay, now another thing that happens is that I think all of you would know this, that in the world of hadith, and this is something I did for you in the first workshop 3 years ago, is that there are different gradings of hadith, right? Gradings of hadith in terms of their authenticity and their reliability. A second type of grading of hadith is in terms of its transmission, how widely it has been transmitted. So the first grading is the most simplest baby grading is Sahih, Hasan, Dhaif, and Mawdu'. Rigorously authenticated and accepted. Hasan, very well authenticated and can still be used as a source of law. Dhaif, that it's weakly authenticated and therefore cannot be used on its own without any corroboration as a source of Islamic law, but could be used for some historical value or for some fadila, to mention the virtue, merit, reward of some nafil, act of worship, right? And then mawdu'a, which means actually a hadith that the hadith scholars have realized is forged and fabricated. So it's not a hadith actually, right? It's not something that the Prophet ﷺ said. In terms of transmission, so a hadith that was narrated by so many Sahaba and so many Tabi'in and Tabai Tabi'in, by the companions and their successors, the first 3 generations of Islam, the narration was so widespread in all 3 generations that it's impossible now for this not to be absolutely true. That type of hadith is called mutawatir. Then a hadith that may not have been narrated by so many companions, but was narrated in their presence and lifetime by so many tabi'in and so many tabai tabi'in, that is called mashhur. And that hadith that was narrated by one or very few companions and tabi'in, then that becomes known as a khabar wahid, or the plural of that is ahad, the solitary reports. And then the third aspect of hadith is looking at the meaning. And if the meaning is something that is aligned with the meanings that you find in Quran and the rest of hadith, is it somewhat aligned but somewhat different? Or is it entirely different, what we call an outlier? Is it a gharib? Is it a complete outlier? that the meaning and import and consequence of this hadith is not to be found anywhere. And then the last is that is it munkar? Okay, I'm using these not in technical terms, but is it a meaning that not only is it an outlier, it's not found anywhere, it has a meaning that actually contravenes and contradicts meanings that are established in more rigorously authenticated and more widely transmitted hadith and the Quran al-Karim. Okay, so this was a quick summary of 1 hour session we gave you in the first workshop. Take care. So all of this is going to come to play in the issue of blasphemy. All right. So let's look at some of these things. So some of the hadith that have been quoted on this topic. The reason I'm actually not mentioning Quran al-Karim is that there are some who have tried to argue that some verses lead to blasphemy law, but in reality there is no verse that really specifically could lead to blasphemy law in terms of capital punishment. No doubt it is mentioned in different verses of Quran that you should not be disrespectful to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you should not even raise your voice above his, so many things. But there's no issue of sin, crime, hellfire, unbelief, murder, death as punishment. Those things aren't anywhere in the Quran al-Karim. Okay, so let's look at some of the hadith. So there's a hadith narrated by Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, kill any person who abuses or curses or maligns any prophet, and lash any person who abuses, curses, maligns any one of my companions. Okay? So this hadith would suggest that if anybody blasphemes against any prophet, not just the Prophet Muhammad, maybe Prophet Jesus, Prophet Moses, alayhim assalam ajma'in, right? They should be killed. And anybody who maligns, reviles, curses any of the Sahaba, they should be whipped and they should be lashed. All right. Now, what has happened is that this hadith has, for example, to give you an example, Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah ta'ala, who's one of the greatest scholars of hadith, he actually said this hadith is entirely baseless and false. So one of the words they use for this is la aslaluhu. It has no true origin, no true basis whatsoever. All right? You can think like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and Imam al-Dhahabi. These are two of the most reputed evaluators of hadith. Okay? So when Imam al-Dhahabi says that, the hadith immediately becomes largely discredited. Largely discredited. Okay? All right. But they haven't taken it to the level that it's an outright forgery. They haven't called it mawdu'a, right? But it is largely discredited. The point for you to understand is it's discredited enough that it cannot be a basis. It cannot be used as an evidence in scholarly discussion. Okay? All right. At the same time, you have a hadith that is narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that a blind person, there was a Sahaba who was blind, a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam who was blind, who was unable to see, had a servant who used to, a non-Muslim servant to assist them because they were blind, who used to say bad things about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, this is a Sahabiya. So the blind Muslim woman, she told that non-Muslim female attendant servant to her that don't do that blasphemy, don't say these things, bad things about my Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, now there's a very famous Indian scholar, Allama Khalil Ahmad Saharanpuri Ramtale, Allama Khalil Ahmad Saharanpuri Ramtale, who wrote a commentary on the collection of Abu Dawud known as Bazl Majzud. And he said that this hadith, in his commentary on this hadith, he said that the position of Hanafi fiqh is that a non-Muslim who is living in a Muslim land, if they commit this verbal blasphemy on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they should be given a ta'zir, some type of judge, qadi, or court-appointed punishment, and they should not be given the death punishment. All right? And this is actually the position of the Hanafi jurists, that blasphemy done by a non-Muslim is not something that merits the death penalty. Blasphemy done by a Muslim, should that merit the death penalty? Then apostasy means done by a Muslim who leaves Islam, should that merit the death penalty? Let me talk about that also a little bit, right? And then we can come back to this issue of blasphemy being done by a non-Muslim. All right? So anyway, so this hadith was in the collection of Abu Dawud in the modern numbering, hadith number 782 that I just mentioned to you, and I showed you the commentary of Allama Khalil Ahmad Saranpuri Rahmatullahi on this hadith. All right? Okay. Now, blasphemy against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, many ulama have viewed that the death penalty for that by a Muslim was done in a time when you had a complete Islamic state in society. What does that mean? That means a society that has established the hujjah, the absolute definitive proof of the reality of Islam. In other words, one is that, okay, I individually believe in Islam, but there's a question that can the religion of Islam, does the religion of Islam have enough guidance to truly establish a socio-economic, just society for human beings? If you have an Islamic state and society that establishes that, so beyond the person's individual belief, that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? There is now a second factor, which is this hujjah. The second factor, that there is a ground reality, a social reality, an empirical reality that is a dalil, is a hujjah, is a proof of the truth of Islam, haqiqat of Islam, haqqaniyat of Islam. So therefore, when a person who, as a Muslim, already individually believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, second, they actually were living in a true Islamic state and society, so they saw externally that Islam is true. If they choose to commit apostasy and leave the religion, this was viewed as a capital offense. All right? Now, the origin of this is actually at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the historians, the ulama of Sirah, say that the reason the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam first said this was that the munafiqun, so there was a group of people at that time who were imposters. They were hypocrites, they were fakes, they were pretending to be Muslim. And then one thing they would do is they would pretend to be Muslim and then they would leave Islam. And then they would go and tell people, oh yeah, I was with him for 5 years and I've left. Now that gives a lot of authority, right? So other sort of, let's say, other members of the Quraysh were watching. They didn't accept Islam initially. They were going to watch, right? And they were going to wait and see, okay, what further revelation comes. And they're also waiting to see, like I told you, ground reality, what exactly happens? What type of community will these people be? What type of society will they form, right? And if you remember this, by the way, to show you the link, if you know your Quran well, munafiqun is specifically also used in Quran for the people of Medina Munawwara. Not all the people, but this phenomenon of hypocrites increased. The phenomenon of hypocrisy and impostor believers increased in Medina Munawwara, such that they also would go out and then come back from the battle, and people would be also affected by that and thinking, okay, maybe we should not defend Islam, all right? So there were a lot of issues that were coming in Medina Munawwara. And then what would happen is when somebody like that would then leave, right, they had credibility because they were claiming, but that was a lie. They were never truly Muslim. They were actually, so it's not even apostasy. They weren't truly Muslim. They were faking it. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he realized that this is what's going on, and Allah Ta'ala inspired him to create this punishment for apostasy at that time for this reason. Okay? That's how it begins. So now the munafiq, because he's not really a believer, right? And you've seen in Quran that Allah Ta'ala says to believers that if you really think you're on haqq, why don't you ask for maut? You should ask for death to come, and you will never ask for death to come. So this worked. This was the deterrent. And this is part of what if you look at the psychology of criminal law today, they say that a large part of punishments is to act as a deterrent. So by creating this punishment of death for somebody who apostatizes, right? Actually, the Prophet ﷺ was doing that as a deterrent because he knew a couple of things. Now listen to this very carefully. He knew, number one, that the person who truly doesn't have iman, who is a fake imposter, will always be scared of death. And therefore all of them will entirely abandon this strategy of pretending to be Muslim. They may still do that, but they will abandon the strategy that after pretending to Muslim, they will leave Islam apparently. So people lose their confidence in Islam. And that actually also historical fact is the case. That after Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam made this a punishment for apostasy, no one then left. Second thing he knew for a fact, and you should also know for a fact, and I definitely know it as a fact, and I'm going to suggest that all of you should accept it as a fact. What? That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew, as I also will claim that I know, that no single true believer Sahabi would ever leave Islam. So actually what you call apostasy, which is somebody who actually believes and then chooses to disbelieve, that actually never even happened in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Do you understand? This is a very important thing. Do you understand? Right? Now, given that that actually never happened in the time of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to what extent can we use his ruling later on to say, because it does happen later on, right? And it does happen today, and it happens in Karachi, and it happens in New York, and it happens to Pakistanis who go to America, and it happens, right? I personally know people, right? That a person who did truly believe, maybe forget their level of practice, but they truly believed, they then truly disbelieve, right? There's no example of that from the Sunnah. Do you understand? So the question, okay, second. So that's the first difference between a current incident and the Sunnah period. Second is the person who's doing that today is not doing it as a strategy to undermine Islam. They're doing it because they themselves became doubtful and skeptical and became an atheist. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. So that's the second difference between what the Prophet ﷺ had in mind when he created the death penalty for apostasy and what happens today. Third is the person who does it today is doing it without that hujjah. He's not doing it in Medina Munawwara of the Prophet ﷺ. He's not doing it in the Islamic society and state. He's not doing it where the reality and truth of Islam has been established as a social reality externally. So these are three big differences between any case of apostasy today and the type of apostasy that the Prophet ﷺ was talking about. Beyond that, I cannot take the discussion with you. This is a discussion between me, and other ulama. Although I don't have to be there, ulama can have on this, right? But these are the things, I can just tell you things have to be looked at and things have to be deliberated over, all right? Ultimately, whether the senior ulama decide that yes, all these things and maybe other things that they look at leads them to conclude that today the punishment for apostasy should not be death, or may even be that ultimately ulama will look at these things and other things and decide, no, that today still the apostasy, punishment for apostasy should be death, right? This issue I will be talking a bit about tomorrow when I talk about traditional Islam of the 21st century, filling the gaps, right? Just remember this when I talk about that. Okay, so the same thing is about the Muslim doing blasphemy, right? So I did the more extreme one, which is apostasy. So obviously then the same, if I'm telling you even the apostasy thing can be revisited, so clearly blasphemy, which is a lesser crime, can be revisited. Interestingly, you would find in the works of the jurists that if a Muslim, so let's look at the religious crime aspect, that if a Muslim did apostasy, they didn't say you just immediately kill him or her. There was this notion of rehabilitation, right? that, okay, they should be warned, they should be guided. Maybe some cases they might have to be imprisoned, and in that imprisoned, which would be a very light, in today's terms, minimum security holding facility, right, in which they would then have a chance openly to ask their questions and express their doubts, and then others would have a chance to try to address their doubts and address their questions. Some jurists set time limits on this. Some gave it no time limit. But yes, many of them did write that when the time limit ends or whatever, if the person is unrepentant, you should kill them. But they were basing it on that sunnah ruling, which I told you is not, strictly speaking, be applied to this context. Because a theological question arises. What's the real point of killing such a person? Right? It doesn't really make any sense. Because Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran that you can't kill a human being, right? Except for very, very particular things. So it's a question that what the Prophet ﷺ said about that time and about that act, is it really applicable today? In this, forget even this day, let's look at the time that scholars were writing, in medieval Baghdad, right? In the time that they were writing, even in their context, forget even today's context, right? A more traditional person would argue against me by saying, look, the ulama were living in a context that was different from Medina Munawwara. They were writing this in 5th century Baghdad. They were writing this in 4th century Damascus. They were writing this in 7th century Egypt. They were aware the times had changed. And they know, and you think that you know more than them. They would have understood everything you have said also. They knew this history that the Prophet did the punishment for apostasy before the munafiqs. They also know that. Everything you said, they know it. And I would agree also they know it, right? And then you know what they would say. They would say, but even though they knew all that, they still felt that the punishment for apostasy should be death. But the point I would make there, then it becomes clear, however, that that punishment then is the decision of the jurists. It's not the Quranic punishment, right? And even they would agree it's not the sunnah punishment, because the sunnah punishment was for the munafiq apostate. It's a juristic punishment. Now, this is a very dangerous sentence. I'm actually starting what I was going to do with you tomorrow. Because normally, I don't like to say this either. Because if I say this, I've opened up the door for all of Ghamdi and all of these other people who say everything is just the jurist law. And you should leave everything, right? So there's a question mark here. And I would just simply say this much in front of you, although I'm actually saying it on record, which I would not probably want to. I've probably said much more than I would want to say on the record, actually. We need to think about, yeah. Because I've actually started a discussion with you, which is not supposed to be had with you, but it's supposed to be had by other ulama. But the point is that ulama should at least sit and deliberate this and rethink it. They may come to the same conclusion, but there's no harm in looking at it afresh, all right? And unfortunately, that hasn't been done to the best of my knowledge, right, on this issue of apostasy and blasphemy by a Muslim. So finally was going back to the issue then of the blasphemy by a non-Muslim, and what happened very recently in Pakistan. So in Hanafi fiqh, that is absolutely clear. There's no doubt about that between any alim, even Mufti Taqi Usmani, an audio of his was circulating when you had this recent case of Asiya Bibi, although that audio of his recorded before the incident, just in one of his classes, in which he openly said, clearly said, categorically said, that in Hanafi fiqh, the punishment for a non-Muslim who does blasphemy is not death. And I showed you also one example of a Deobandi scholar, Khalil Ahmad Sadampuri Ramtale, right? Who also wrote that in his commentary of Abu Dawood. However, the Pakistani law was drafted not on the basis of Hanafi fiqh, which is actually quite unusual. Because in Pakistan, the vast majority of the citizens follow the Hanafi legal interpretation. I don't know the details. It's possible somebody could research this and that this may be something that could be known, but I don't know myself at this moment exactly how and why the law was drafted in the way it was. I would speculate, but you should only take this as speculation, not as knowledge, that perhaps certain groups, so because of speculating I won't name who I think they are, but certain groups may have tried to position themselves and posture that they are the great lovers of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that their great love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam means that they will leave their own Hanafi fiqh and pick another fiqh which has a more strict punishment out of their severe, intense love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Possibly this may be what happened. All right. Now, if you look at the reality, then, so I'm actually going to. I think you've understood from my comments now that not actually because I'm a quote unquote Hanafi, even without considering whose position it is, I generally think that the true Islamic position is that a non-Muslim who does blasphemy should not be punished by death, right? I think then, okay, now the second thing is when you move to the legal evidence, it's very tricky. How do you really establish what a person said? Now, maybe there are multiple people who testified against them. In this recent case, again, I don't know all the details because obviously I wasn't there. I've heard different accounts of it. So that itself is a problem then if you're a judge, right? That you're hearing different accounts. How do you decide by different accounts? But one account that I've heard, and it appears not to have been entirely refuted, is that they were out drinking, they were out working in the field or something, and it was hot and she wanted to drink water, and the Muslim women told her that, oh, because you drank from the cup, now we cannot drink from your cup. All right? If that is the case, then this itself is a teaching that is wrong Islamically. Why? Because this is a teaching that has come from Hinduism. This is from the caste system. This is the teaching that there were certain people who were called untouchables. And alhamdulillah, it's gone away to a certain extent in India, but unfortunately it's still there in the rural poor communities. And that person who is of untouchable caste, if they drink from a glass, you cannot drink from their glass. So, or in simple playground, school playground terms, the Muslims started it. All right? Because they said this, all she did was drink from a glass. That's completely permissible human act, right? Now then you have a verse in Quran al-Kareem where Allah Ta'ala says, don't mock their gods lest they mock yours. Don't mock their religion lest they mock yours. And Allah Ta'ala doesn't go on to say that if you mock theirs and they mock yours, then kill them. Right? So if this is the case, because they did it on religious grounds, they told her, because you're Christian. So maybe she shot back. This is a context that has to be taken into account by any judge or any Islamic scholar. So she said what she said not out of hatred for the Prophet ﷺ, not initial original hatred, not initial deliberate blasphemy. She said what she said in response to her own religion being attacked. Right? Fine, yes, all of us can say, oh, she shouldn't have replied. You know, how many times have you, when somebody cut you off in the traffic, you didn't go back and horn at him? How many times have you not, how many times do me and you reply? Okay? And these are people who are poor. It's extremely hot. They're sweating. They're extremely thirsty. It's a difficult physical condition for a human being to be in, right? But she said then whatever she said, all right? And then these women, okay, now let's say she said everything that she's alleged to say. All the women then are true in their testimony. So they are truly offering their testimony that she said these sentences, right? And she offered in her defense the context. I'd say, okay, if you were to ask me, and I'm not saying I don't have that authority or capacity, but let's just pretend I was the qazi. It's okay, maybe 1 month in jail, maybe, keep her in 1 month in jail in order to calm things down, partly to protect her from the others. Maybe try to explain to her that they were even wrong, right? And also explain to her that who the Prophet ﷺ really was, right? And therefore that he also wasn't unworthy of the abusive words that you used, right? Certainly, whatever sentence she is termed to now 2, 3, 4 years, I don't remember how, but it was years, however much time she spent in jail, that should be acceptable to anyone and everyone as not just reasonable, if you ask me, even too much of a punishment for what she was alleged to say. What I would suggest to you is that love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam cannot be defined or confined by taking on one poor Christian woman, right? It doesn't make any sense. Where did all these people, I've never seen people protest poverty. There are many, so if you want to say you love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and out of love for him you're willing to go to the streets and protest, where was your protest against poverty? Where were your protests against so many of the social causes? Where were the protests against so many social injustices? Where have you shown up in mass protests on so many things that are important to him? Right? You were absent in all of that, and you were present for this. But there is a certain sort of, you can call hardcore extremist. Even 1 or 2 of you here are like that. I don't think any of you will kill me, but I do know that 1 or 2 of you here definitely or is not going to be happy about what I'm saying, because it's a strange thing. It's so on the one hand, I'm happy to see the love for the Prophet ﷺ that the ordinary Pakistani has. That in of itself is encouraging, that alhamdulillah they have a love for their religion and love for the Prophet in their heart. But it saddens me and actually scares me to see how that pure emotion can be twisted. And I suggest that it was twisted by certain people who were manipulators, right? And who have these movements and want to become famous and want to have mass followings and therefore want to show the state that they can bring out 10,000 people. And I think it's unfortunate that people didn't realize that they were manipulated. And I think it's also unfortunate that ulama didn't speak out about this incident. Now, I've tried to figure out why they haven't spoken out. Some people who defend them to me say that, well, they didn't want to speak out because then that would cause Deobandi, Barelvi, rivalry and tension. Then again, in every masjid there would be fighting. Then again, there would be all types of issues across the country. Maybe, yeah, Allahu Alam, but there has to be, because I can tell you from my own experience, there were a lot of at least university educated people or university students who were confused. They wanted to know, is this true? I mean, what are we supposed to do? What's the answer? Does our love for the Prophet ﷺ mean that we should be protesting against this decision and we should be upset? Because there's a certain group of scholars who are claiming that and thousands who are following them, and nobody else is telling us otherwise. So we're confused. So in cases like that, I think the ulama do have to speak out. And you have to do some tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that if you speak the truth, Allah ta'ala won't let some other fitna arise that, there's going to be now fighting everywhere in the country between these two different groups of ulama. But maybe these ulama have had experience in Pakistan, which I could very well see, and I'll just stop here because we have to break for Dhuhr. It's quite likely that they have actually experienced this before, and they have spoken the truth in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and that led to even more problems. And it could have happened to them once, twice, 3 times, because I've seen that in Syria and Palestine. I've seen this, right? That there have been times when ulama have spoken the truth, and unfortunately, Allahu Alam, how or why, it makes things worse as opposed to making things better. And I think that if I was from a group of ulama like that, and we have this track record and experience, then I could understand why then amongst themselves they would say, let's just be silent this time, right? And I can say that alhamdulillah, in this case, they were proven right. Because as you see, that no matter what the protests were, alhamdulillah, no single Christian was attacked, no church was burned, there was no loss of life, no violence that took place, at least in the Christian community. I don't know, there may have been 1 or 2 protesters I don't know what happened between the police and the protesters, right? And now it's all calmed down, right? It just was a few weeks. So maybe they were silent for the reason I suggested to you, that in past speaking out led to further problem. And maybe while they were silent, they were sad about having to be silent. So maybe they made even more du'as to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And maybe it's those very same ulama's du'as to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has made everything resolve itself just in a matter of a couple of weeks. Right? So now I'm also teaching you, and also how to teach the secular liberal crowd, that, there's a lot of things that go on. And the last thing I will say, maybe I will say this one. Let me just get out of the way before Zohar. The secular liberal crowd love to mock all Maulvis and all Daiwalas because of the protests, right? And that is also actually called racism. For example, in America, sometimes when there's police violence against African American or black people, the African American community riots. Like when I was a kid, there was the Rodney King riots in LA. If any TV commentator said this, that look at them writing, all black people are like this, or use those scenes, imagery, which were true scenes of rioting or breaking into, setting cars on fire, and said this, that see, the blacks are like this, they would have been accused of extreme racism and fired from their job. But here, our Pakistani TV commentators can happily say, all Maulvis are like this, Daiwalas are like this. So it's actually racism, bigotry. And anybody who does that is clearly not a liberal, is an illiberal. They may be secular in terms of they choose not to practice Islam. That's a separate thing. And that's something I'll be explaining to you tomorrow, that secularism and liberalism are 2 separate things. And in the West, the vast majority of secular people are liberal. And in Pakistan and in Turkey and in Egypt and in Muslim countries, the vast majority of secular people are illiberal. And the type of news op-ed columns that were written in English language media and the type of news commentary on TV during this whole 2-week issue of the Asia Bibi case was a clear example of that. All right. So we just have to go straight to us for Dhuhr Salah, then you have a lunch break after that, and then we will resume inshallah. And at the end of the second session, then again we will do the joint Q&A and discussion.